This week, we've seen a new round of protests in Iran, starting with merchants in Tehran and quickly spreading across the country. My name is Yegana Torbati. I cover Iran and Turkey for the Washington Post, and I published a story today, Wednesday, December 31st, laying out what we know about how the protests started and what's behind them. You should read that story in print or online, but in this video, I wanted to get a bit deeper into a few things I've heard and seen about what makes this round of protests unique. Iran has been facing an ongoing economic crisis really for years, with persistent high inflation and low economic growth. But in the last few weeks, especially, the pressure on Iranians had really grown immense, with the Iranian rial repeatedly reaching new record lows, like around 1.4 million rials to the US dollar this weekend. Just to give you a sense of the crisis Iranians have experienced over the last decade or so, around 12 years ago when I was covering Iran for Reuters, the rial was around 33,000 per dollar. There's a lot of reasons behind the economic crisis in Iran, including mismanagement, corruption, and international isolation, but I want to get to what we've been seeing this week. These protests started on Sunday, and the earliest ones appear to have occurred among mobile phone vendors in Tehran. And that's no accident. Those merchants keep a very close eye on the rate of the rial because their goods are largely imported. The less the rial is worth, the higher the prices they have to charge consumers. At some point, consumers simply can't afford these types of goods. So on Sunday, some of these shopkeepers closed up their businesses and chanted slogans calling for others to join them. One thing that's really important to note is that in the history of the Islamic Republic, it's quite rare for protests to be initiated by the merchant class or the bazaar. The traditional bazaar was an important part of the coalition behind the revolution in 1979 that established the Islamic Republic. While today's bazaar class is not as important to Iran's economy as it was back then, it still has symbolic weight. And the fact that business owners launched these protests, one economist told me, is an indication that deep economic pain is now touching even those that were considered more well off. In past rounds of protests, like in 2017 that focused on the economy, the protesters were more likely to be ordinary workers. By Monday, the protests had spread both throughout Tehran and to other cities. I spoke to someone who witnessed protests in Tehran's main bazaar on Monday afternoon, and one thing he said that I thought was really interesting was that the protesters tended to be the younger, less established shopkeepers rather than the really wealthy, larger merchants. We sort of talk about the bazaar as though it's a monolith, but that was a good reminder for me that even within that social class, there are important differences. By Tuesday, university students, who are a major part of Iran's civil society, had joined the protests. Iranian businesses were posting on social media that they were closing in solidarity, and the government had deployed security forces onto the streets to suppress the demonstrations. It's also important to note that, like in past rounds of protests, though the spark may have been economic, the slogans we heard quickly took aim at the entire ruling system. I was really struck by an interview I did with a young man who works as a barista, who expressed to me that his generation feels like their elders have created a system that leaves them with very little hope for the future. It's really hard to know what's going to happen from here, whether the protests will spread further or die out. Government officials, including Iran's president, have said that the protesters have legitimate demands. But in past rounds of protests, security forces have used deadly violence to suppress unrest. And the person who holds ultimate power in Iran, Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has so far been silent. I'll be keeping a close eye on what happens over the next few days.